the vaccination passport program landed at Da Nang Airport. This was the first group of international visitors to visit Vietnam in 2 years, following the pandemic's closure of the country's borders and cancellation of all international flights in March of last year. Passengers from Australia, the Czech Republic, Denmark, France, Germany, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, South Korea, the United States, and the United Kingdom boarded a Vietnam Airlines plane out of Incheon Airport. They were required to make a health statement upon arrival and were then taken to the New World Hoi Na Resort in Duishan District, Quang Nam Province, which borders Da Nang for a 7-night stay. Some tourists will fly home after finishing the vacation package, while others will stay to visit their relatives. On November 18 and 25, Quang Nam will welcome 300 more foreign passengers on 2 flights. To be able to enter Vietnam, all travelers must provide proof that they have been properly vaccinated or have recovered from COVID and tested negative for the novel coronavirus within 72 hours of leaving South Korea. While in Vietnam, they must install the iGovern and PC COVID Health Declaration apps on their cell phones. On Saturday, 209 South Korean visitors are scheduled to arrive on Kim Jang's Phu Quoc Island. Since November, Quang Nam, Kim Jang, Can Hoa, Quang Ninh, and Da Nang are the 5 places that have been approved by the government to welcome tourists who are fully immunized. And that's the latest news here in Vietnam. Back to you, Eliana.
Yes, thank you, Ralph, for your updates there. You stay safe and healthy.
Thank you, Eliana. I am Ralph Clarence Kalo, reporting live from Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam. We live in interesting times.
Fully vaccinated tourists from green list countries and territories may soon enter the Philippines once the interagency task force issues the guidelines that are expected to come out before the end of the month. The Department of Tourism on Friday said the IATF has approved in principle the entry of fully vaccinated tourists from green list countries, territories, or jurisdictions following the guidelines as may be finalized and approved by the task force. In a text message, Tourism Secretary Bernadette Romulo Puyat said the IATF is set to meet this afternoon to discuss the protocols, which will be released definitely by November. She made an assurance that this move to open leisure travel from green countries would be based on strict conditions. Only fully vaccinated individuals with vaccines recognized by the country's Food and Drug Administration under an emergency use authorization or EUA, or those authorized by the World Health Organization will be allowed entry to the country.
Back here in the country, the Department of Foreign Affairs said 3 Chinese Coast Guard vessels fired off a water cannon on 2 Philippine ships to stop them from going to Ayungin Shoal in the West Philippine Sea. DFA Secretary Teodoro Locsin Jr. said he protested in the strongest term this incident to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Beijing and even reminded China that the attacked Philippine ship is a public vessel and covered by the Philippine-U.S. Defense Treaty. In a statement, Locsin said the DFA received a report from the AFP Western Command that the 2 Philippine supply ships doing routine transport of food supplies to Filipino soldiers were blocked and water cannoned while on their way to Ayungin Shoal, or the Second Thomas Shoal, located 194 kilometers west of Palawan. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but our boats had to abort their resupply mission, according to Secretary Locsin. I have conveyed in the strongest terms to His Excellency Wang Shilian, Ambassador of China, and to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Beijing, our outrage, condemnation, and protest of the incident, according to the country's top diplomat. Locsin also asserted that the Philippines has sovereignty and jurisdiction over Ayungin Shoal as it's part of the Philippine territory, being an integral part of the Kalayaan Island Group. and has maritime sovereign rights as it's also part of its exclusive economic zone and continental shelf. The acts of the Chinese Coast Guard vessels are illegal. China has no law enforcement rights in and around these areas, and they must take heed and back off, he said. He also reminded China that a public vessel is covered by the Philippines-United States Mutual Defense Treaty. Under the MDT or the treaty, U.S. is under treaty obligation to help the Philippines in case of an attack by a foreign aggressor within the Philippine territory in the Pacific area or on any Philippine public vessel. This is the first time that the Philippines publicly mentioned the MDT over an incident in the West Philippine Sea.
The Philippine government asserted anew the 2016 arbitral award in the South China Sea during a maritime meet among Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or the ASEAN member states, the Department of Foreign Affairs said on Thursday. The 11th ASEAN Maritime Forum was held virtually last November 16, coincidentally on the day when 3 Chinese Coast Guard or CCG vessels blocked and fired a water cannon on 2 Philippine boats while en route to resupply Filipino troops at the Ayungin Shoal. Foreign Affairs Assistant Secretary Daniel Espiritu said Manila upholds the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, as the legal framework under which all ocean activities are regulated. The Philippines follows a rules-based approach in the South China Sea, including assertion of the 2016 arbitration award on the South China Sea, which is now part of international law, he said. As our president highlighted at the recent 24th ASEAN-China Summit, the 2016 arbitral award singles out no one and in fact justly favors and benefits the community of law-abiding nations by providing clarity to all, which is beyond compromise, he added. He expressed the Philippines' commitment to achieving the early conclusion of an effective and substantive code of conduct in the South China Sea that is in accordance with international law, particularly the UNCLOS. PH outraged after Chinese vessels blocked PH supply boats. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian on November 18 made a tacit confirmation that the CCG prevented the Filipino boats from entering the area, saying the vessels trespassed into waters near Renaijiao or the Ayungin Shoal of China's Nansha Qingdao or the Spratlys. Zhao said the 2 nations are in communication on this subject hours after the Philippine government publicly condemned the incident.
Hundreds of protesters rallied in Bangkok on Sunday against a decision by a top court that ruled calling for royal reforms amounted to a bid to overthrow Thailand's ultra-powerful monarchy. The Constitutional Court, which critics have long said is politicized, announced on Wednesday that 3 prominent protest leaders had made speeches that aim to overthrow the constitutional monarchy, while the court's decision does not result in criminal penalties for the protest leaders. According to observers, the ruling could shrink an already narrow space for activists campaigning for reform of the monarchy. Take a look.
It's not normal for a constitutional court to make a decision that criticism is treason.
I would say, sorry, but I have to say in a regular country, it wouldn't happen because it's a lie. So first, the Constitutional Court also doesn't have any legitimacy because it comes from the coup and it was appointed by mainly the military, Prayut.
Absolutely wrong. I totally disagree because what the student arguing is reasonable, absolutely reasonable.
Defying a ban on gatherings, hundreds of protesters assembled in Bangkok's main shopping district to rail against the decision, holding signs that said they don't want an absolute monarchy. Protesters flung effigies of the Constitutional Court's judges off a bridge and later burned them, while a small group of saffron-robed monks flashed a three-fingered salute for democracy. Police briefly clashed with some protesters, firing rubber bullets, which hit at least one protester who was bleeding from his chest, according to an AFP reporter on the ground. The injured man was rushed into an ambulance. The city's Erawan Emergency Center said at least 2 people were injured, though no details were given about their condition. By nightfall, protesters had marched to the German embassy, a commentary on the king's frequent stays in the European country. They submitted a letter to the embassy expressing concerns about a return to absolutism, and the rally dispersed soon after. King Maha Vajiralongkorn flew to the country this week, according to German media, his first trip abroad in over a year.
Myanmar's junta has charged Aung San Suu Kyi with committing electoral fraud during the 2020 polls. State media reported Tuesday, the latest in a barrage of allegations against her since her party won in a landslide. Detained since the putsch, Suu Kyi, 76, has been charged with illegally importing walkie-talkies, sedition and corruption, and faces decades in jail if convicted. 15 other officials, including former President Win Myint and the former chairman of the Election Commission, face the same charge, the report added. Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy, or NLD, saw its support increase in the 2020 vote compared to the 2015 election, trouncing a military-aligned party. But the junta has cited fraud during the poll as its reason for seizing power and ending Myanmar's democratic interlude. Suu Kyi will hear the verdict in her trial for incitement against the military on November 30, a source with knowledge of the matter told AFP on Tuesday. She faces 3 years in jail if convicted. Junta Chief Min Aung Hlaing has said fresh elections will be held and the state of emergency lifted by August 2023, extending the initial timeline the military gave when it seized power.
Journalist Danny Fenster says realizing he was freed from Myanmar prison and returning home was the greatest feeling, and speaks about his time in jail where he says he was not mistreated. Former U.S. diplomat Bill Richardson, who secured Fenster's release, describes meeting with Myanmar's junta leader Min Aung Hlaing, saying discussions about helping with COVID-19 vaccine distribution led to a little bit of understanding on the case of Danny. Take a look.
So everything that everybody was able to do within their mandates, this time it worked, and I'm incredibly grateful to seeing Bill and his team there. It's out on the tarmac waiting for me. It's just the greatest feeling I can ever remember having.
Were you mistreated or threatened in any way by the prison authorities?
No, I wouldn't say that. I got myself into trouble there trying to push boundaries, and that caused small confrontations that, I didn't know what would come of them, so I was a little worried, but nothing. I wasn't physically threatened or anything. I thought I got into a good mood, and I thought I had sort of, had this change in perspective. But then, you get a little setback, and then you realize, well, you don't change your perspective and you're finished. You have to do that every day. So every day it's sort of up and down, and then you have some dark moments, and then you have some days that are just pretty much completely fine. So I'm going to take time to celebrate and to spend time with my family, and then, continue concentrating on all the other, not just journalists and prisoners of conscience in Myanmar and everywhere else.
Yes, it helped that I think we went there, our team, especially Steve Ross, who is an expert in this area, and said, there's problems with the delivery of humanitarian assistance and vaccines, government of Myanmar. How can we fix that? And I think those discussions led to a little bit of understanding on the case of Danny. We were in Myanmar for 8 hours to get Danny, 8 hours, in and out. And it took a last meeting with the leader, the military leader, to get a decree where Danny was given an amnesty. And we brought him home. I said to him, this would be a gift, a humanitarian gesture to the American people. And this was the right thing to do. This was a journalist doing his job. This was a journalist reporting on what was happening. And he shouldn't suffer. You know, I took a little heat because they said, well, you met with this leader and you legitimize him by meeting with him. Even though I'm not a member of the government, even though, you know, we don't take orders from the government.
Richard visited Myanmar earlier this month on what was described as a private humanitarian mission. He said at the time that the U.S. State Department had specifically asked him not to raise Fenster's case during his visit. But Richardson did so, insisting that he was working in a private capacity.
So, were you acting in a prison? Were you acting as an emissary for the U.S.?
No. I just said that. No, I don't work for the U.S. government. I was not an emissary.
Bill Richardson has served as an ambassador, cabinet secretary, and governor of New Mexico, but since he returned to being a regular U.S. citizen, he has dedicated his life to a role with similarly high stakes. Richardson is a freelance envoy specializing in high-profile, difficult negotiations to obtain the release of Americans detained by hostile governments. And on Monday, he celebrated his 74th birthday with this latest victory, facilitating the release of American journalist Danny Fenster from a prison in Myanmar, where he was jailed for 11 years last week and faced a possible life sentence. In parallel with his traditional career in politics, Richardson developed a reputation as a diplomatic gunslinger and was even sometimes dubbed the Indiana Jones of American diplomacy. He held high-stakes private face-to-face meetings with a who's who of strong men of the U.S. pariah list, including Iraq's Saddam Hussein, Cuba's Fidel Castro, North Korea's Kim Jong-il, the father of current leader Kim Jong-un, and Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro. The Richardson Center for the Global Engagement says one of its primary missions is negotiating for the release of prisoners and hostages held by hostile regimes or criminal organizations. And today we are honored to have on the show the Honorable Consul General Michael Lyndon B. Garcia from the Philippine Embassy in Thailand. Welcome to the program, sir.
Good afternoon po. Magandang hapon sa lahat ng mga taga-subaybay ng inyong programa. Thanks for having me in this program.
Good afternoon, sir, and thank you for your time po. Sir, kumusta naman po ang kalagayan dyan sa Thailand? Could you give us an update on the present, is it still locked down po, or the economy I know has already opened? But please give us an update on the current situation there in Thailand.
Thank you po for the question. Dito po sa Thailand, it's becoming more normal now. Shops are open, the malls are open, there are no movement restrictions. If I may describe the general economic situation here.
Yes.
Last year po, when the pandemic started, at the end of the year, yung ekonomiya ng Thailand ay nag-contract po ng 6.1%. Ito ay dahil sa pag-decline ng kanilang trade, saka tourism, yung disruption sa supply chain nila, saka yung pagbaba ng spending capacity ng population nila. We know that Thailand is an export-dependent economy, so any external factor may affect the performance of the economy. Earlier this year naman po, yung ekonomiya nila nag-grow ng 2%, and that can be attributed to a very productive agriculture. Malakas po ang kanilang agricultural exports. But their unemployment was affected. At the beginning of the year, at the first quarter, the economy lost more than 700,000 jobs no, na available. Inadmit naman ng Bank of Thailand na yung ekonomiya ng Thailand sa ngayon ay medyo mahina pa and would not be able to generate as much output dahil din naman sa yung external demand sa global market ngayon ay mababa pa. So, ang expectation nila based on the estimates of some experts including the Asian Development Bank, the economic growth for Thailand is expected to grow only by less than 1%, to be exact 0.8% this year, and expected to post about 3.9% in 2022. But remember that since nag-contract ang Thai economy by more than 6% last year, kung hindi masyadong mataas yung growth na ipopost ng ekonomiya nila next year, it will not still bring the economy back to its pre-pandemic levels. Ngayon, para maibsan yung epekto ng pandemic sa ekonomiya nila, the Thai government introduced a 1 trillion baht package, which is equivalent to roughly 30 billion US dollars or about 6% of GDP. And that fund is intended to finance yung mga economic and social programs of the government, including yung fund cash transfers nila, the purchases of vaccines, and financial relief for businesses who were affected by the pandemic. And i-continue ko lang po no yung isang aspeto ng ekonomiya ng Thailand na napaka-importante ay yung tourism nila.
Yes.
The tourism industry in Thailand amounts to $100 billion and yung tourism arrivals nila is 40 million before pandemic. But due to the pandemic, they lost about 3 million tourism-dependent jobs and an estimated $50 billion in revenue. And this year, they have started to loosen yung mga travel restrictions nila. They have started to accept tourists, and they are now targeting to receive as many as 100,000 tourists. But that is very far from the 40 million that they normally have. So with that, they expect that tourism arrivals will only go back to pre-pandemic levels in 2 to 3 years. Right now, the government has already introduced several travel schemes to be able to revive the tourism industry in Thailand.
How did the Thai government respond to the needs of the small and micro businesses? What was the state of the government and the bank lending?
Mayroon po is a mix of policy instruments, including yung pag-lower ng interest rates para sa mga businesses, and then pagbigay ng additional loans pa para to allow the businesses to survive while waiting for them to reopen.
Also, recently, November 1, I think, it was the Sandbox Phuket scheme, wherein fully vaccinated passengers from 63 countries are now being required to spend one night. Thailand has been reopened for 2 weeks na pala for the Phuket Sandbox scheme, a tourism experiment that started it all na nagbukas na po sa foreign tourists. So ito po ay they will require soft quarantine for travelers. Pero they will stay in Phuket for parang quarantine. Pero actually, they will stay in Phuket for 7 days na lang po ba ngayon? How effective is this po? Parang ang galing po ng ginawa ng Thailand dito.
Okay, so yung Sandbox Phuket scheme po is one of their first initiatives para mapabalik gradually yung mga tourists back to Thailand by putting a mechanism na maging safe para din sa mga locals dito sa Thailand. So, inumpisahan nila yun sa Phuket. Pero yung sandbox areas po sa ngayon, na hindi lang po sa Phuket, it also includes Bangkok, Krabi, saka Panga. Yung mechanism po nito is that yung mga tourists who are fully vaccinated, upon arrival, if they test negative, they can stay in the sandbox area for 7 days.
Yes.
And then after that, they can proceed to other areas of Thailand. Pero hindi lang po yan ang a scheme na ini-implement sa ngayon ng Thailand. May bago silang scheme na ini-implement noong November 1, yung tinatawag nilang exemption from quarantine or test and go scheme. Yung scheme naman na ito is also for fully vaccinated tourists. And they only have to have a negative RT-PCR test before and after arrival, as insurance worth $50,000. At dapat at kailangan lang nila magstay ng isang gabi lang sa hotel.
Okay. Could you tell us how the tourist spots survived during this long lockdown po? I'm sure the effect went down to individual and household spending capacities of the tourist workers.
Opo. Severe po ang effect ng lockdowns sa tourism sa Thailand. The tourist spots, of course, the tourism establishments were closed. And we know that marami din po ang mga Pilipino nagtatrabaho sa mga establishments na ito.
Yes.
Let's say around 2,000, no? About 15% of the number of Filipinos working here in Thailand. Kasi karamihan po ng Pilipino dito ay nag-work po as teachers, both in public and private schools. So from what we monitored from people that we know also, dahil nag-close yung mga tourism establishments sa mga areas na yon, talaga pong walang masyadong tao during the periods of lockdown. So syempre walang revenue yung mga establishments na to. So marami po ang na-lay off in the meantime, at yung iba naman po may mga pay cuts sa kanila. Pero kung titingnan po naman natin yung datos, no, sa remittances ng mga Pilipino sa Pilipinas, in 2020, the remittances was around $74 million. And it seems like hindi masyadong naapektuhan ng pandemic yung remittances nila.
Okay.
Possibly because many of them have decided to send more financial help to their families in the Philippines. And I think this is consistent with what the central bank, no, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas is saying, na despite the pandemic, yung cash remittances ng mga Filipino noong 2020 ay bumaba lang po ng 0.8% or less than 1%. So mataas pa rin po ang remittances na naipadala ng mga Filipinos dito sa Thailand sa mga pamilya nila sa Pilipinas. Yung period po ng lockdown na yun ay ginamit ng mga tourism establishments. Yung iba sa kanila who are able to weather the financial storm, they use their time, no, to undertake repairs and improvements to prepare for the possible reopening anytime. Yung iba namang mga hotels were getting financial support from the government. Yung iba naman ay naging alternative state quarantine for those arriving from abroad. At yung iba naman na nahihirapan became targets of merger and acquisitions, no, as they adjust their business operations.
Also, Thailand plans to allow more foreign workers into the country now, starting next month. And the government is allowing illegal workers by end of the month also. Could you tell us more about this and its effect on our Filipino workers po?
With the reopening po of the economy in Thailand, of course, businesses are operating again. Yung mga schools naman are gradually starting to open.
Yes.
May mga schools na nag-face-to-face na, pero karamihan pa rin, hindi pa rin because they have to comply with certain COVID safety measures. And also they are required to at least have 85% of their faculty and the personnel vaccinated.
Oh, speaking of vaccination, how is the status of booster shots po dyan, Conjen?
Let me talk about the vaccination performance, no, here in Thailand.
Oh, yes, please, sir.
So, ang population ng Thailand is 70 million, and so far they have administered more than 83 million doses already. So if you look at the target nila, 85% doon are 15 years old and above. And those who have received the first dose is already 60%.
Wow.
Ang second dose naman, 50%. Meron na rin naka-receive ng third dose, which is about 4%. But if we look at those who have received the second dose already, they are saying that by the end of November, they will already achieve 70%, which is the benchmark for the state of herd immunity. Doon naman po sa mga estudyante, they have started already vaccinating students, and they're saying that 86% of those who have indicated or registered to be vaccinated have already been vaccinated, and 11% of those are already fully vaccinated.
Okay.
Puntahan naman po natin ang vaccination for foreigners naman. Sa ngayon, they have already given more than 2 million vaccine doses to foreigners starting noong February until this month. And that represents about 26% of all the foreigners living in Thailand. Pero ang priority po din na doon, yung mga foreigners na who are in the tourism and education sectors.
Okay. So, sir, all right. So,
Kung may dagdag ko lang po, no? Yung sa booster doses naman po, they have already started that, I think since last month, and they keep on increasing, no, yung rate nila vaccination as booster doses. Pero ito po ay available lamang para dun sa mga na-inject ng Sinopharm saka Sinovac or combination of these vaccines. Pero available po ito sa lahat ng Thais and foreigners who had those vaccines po.
okay. So, kasama na po, syempre, ang mga Pilipino po doon.
Kasama po ang mga Pilipino doon.
Kumusta naman po ang ating mga kababayan dyan, sir? Ano po ang status ng coronavirus situation po nila doon ngayon po?
Ay, mga Pilipino dito ngayon, of course, like I said, no, they were affected by the pandemic since last year. May mga nawalan ng trabaho. Some have returned to the Philippines already through government repatriation flights. Ang iba naman sa mga special commercial flights. Siguro we have repatriated, no, using government funds almost 800 Filipino nationals, and we have assisted about 3,000 Filipino nationals who were looking for an opportunity, no, to return to the Philippines by coordinating with the airlines to allow them to have seats in those special commercial flights. So as Thailand continues along the path of economic recovery, we expect, of course, that the situation will get better for overseas Filipinos in Thailand.
Yes.
Especially ngayon na nagkakaroon na ng gradual na pag-open ng mga schools, no, for face-to-face classes, and of course the opening of the hotels, resorts, and restaurants.
That's good to know. Sir, kung ang isang, since Thailand has already opened up to 63 countries, I think, for fully vaccinated individuals. Kung kunyari ho, gustong pumunta dyan sa Thailand, ano ho ba ang kailangan nilang gawin?
So, in-announce po ng Thai government, no, before November 1,
Apo.
na they will open to 63 countries, no, travelers from those countries. Kasama po ang Pilipinas doon.
Yes.
Pero yun po, specifically, ay under dun sa bago nilang program na in-introduce, yung tinatawag nilang exemption from quarantine scheme or test and go scheme. Ang requirements lang doon is that they have to be fully vaccinated, so they should be able to present yung kanilang vaccination certificates. Based sa announcement ng Royal Thai Embassy sa Manila, they accept yung vaccination certificate na in-issue ng LGU, in-issue ng Bureau of Quarantine, including yung WHO International Certificate of Vaccination. Ang isa pa pong kailangan is that they have to test negative for COVID before and then also after arrival. So dalawang test po yun. And then an insurance of that coverage of at least $50,000.
Okay. So insurance po yun.
Insurance po yun, health
coverage po
insurance.
yun. Okay, hindi po cash.
Hindi po. So
Okay.
yung kailangan ng po nila na hotel booking is just one night while waiting for the result of their RT-PCR test upon arrival po. So isa yun sa mga schemes, pero yung dati pa, meron na pong nasabi ko kanina, yung sandbox program scheme. They have to be fully vaccinated also, tapos they have to be tested negative for RT-PCR test, and then they have to stay in the sandbox area for 7 days, tapos pwede na silang umikot anywhere in Thailand. And then the other one, which is a little bit of a modification from tinatawag nilang alternative state quarantine before, tinatawag nila ngayon na alternative quarantine scheme. Ang kailangan lang nila ay mag-book ng 10-day mandatory quarantine. And then they have to test negative sa RT-PCR test.
Sa hotel na po yun.
Sa hotel na po yun. So there are 3 schemes available. Sa tingin ko po, like for example, nung in-implement na nila itong exemption from quarantine scheme or test and go scheme, almost 45,000 tourists have already arrived since November 1 lang. And 30,000 of those ay ginamit nila yung exemption from quarantine scheme. Only 10,000 used the sandbox scheme. And very few used the alternative quarantine scheme dahil nga mas mahaba-haba yung quarantine period nito. So sa tingin ko, eventually, ang magpe-prevail dito is the present scheme, which is the exemption from quarantine scheme. As more countries become qualified, no? Doon sa list nila na pwedeng mag-travel dito sa Thailand.
That's true. Pero kung gusto nila magbakasyon-bakasyon ng konti, pwede dun sa sandbox po, ano?
Pwede po. Kung doon lang sila sa specific areas like Phuket and Krabi, which are the most popular tourist destinations.
Yes, para silang nasa paradise po, ano po, habang ang galing po na ginawa ng Thailand.
Pero ang palagi ko pong sinasabi sa kahit sa mga Filipino and foreigners,
yes.
Mas maganda po ang Pilipinas.
Yes, that's true. I agree po, I agree. Kaya baka yung mga bureaus natin dyan kasama nyo, baka hindi. But anyway, sir, baka meron kayong last message sa mga nanonood po ngayon sa inyo. Baka meron po kayong mensahe.
Maraming salamat po. I just want to say that now that the global vaccination campaign is progressing, this gives us hope that we may be able to go back to or achieve a semblance of normalcy and familiarity of the pre-pandemic life that we had. And here in Thailand, Thailand will soon attain herd immunity, and that also boosts our confidence that the Thai economy will be firmly on the path of economic recovery and eventually also benefit Filipinos working in Thailand. And some of those na umuwi, pwede na silang gradually bumalik dito sa Thailand to regain their employment. Sa amin naman po sa embassy, we continue to provide assistance to our distressed Filipinos. Actually, itong taon po na ito, we had to suspend many of our consular missions, and it also affected our ability to extend yung overseas voting registration namin. But we tried our best. Ngayon na medyo lumuwag na po, magre-resume na kami sa aming outreach services to Khon Kaen and Phuket this November and December. Gusto ko lang pong banggitin din na nakikipag-ugnayan po sa embahada ang Iglesia ni Cristo dahil meron po silang Aid to Humanity program po, which we'll be doing on December 4. And we are very happy to be associated with this very important project para po may tulungan yung ating mga kababayan dito sa Thailand. Kahit kaunting tulong lang, importante ay nakipagbibigay tayo ng pag-asa sa ating mga kababayan dito. Nais ko rin pong i-remind yung ating mga kababayan na bumoto po sila, gamitin nila yung kanilang opportunity na makapagboto para pumili po ng kanilang kandidato para sa May 19, 2022 elections po. At finally, patuloy pa rin tayong mag-iingat at sundin natin ang mga umiiral ng mga health protocols dito sa Thailand. And of course, sa ngalan po ng aming Ambassador Millicent Cruz Paredes, at sa mga bumubuo ng Philippine Embassy in Bangkok, nagpapasalamat po kami sa pagkakataon na ito.
Thank you, Conjen. Also, I just had in the news, our very own Miss Philippines, Samantha Panilio, is now in Thailand po to join the Miss Grand International pageant. And she is currently in Phuket for the sandbox scheme for the naka-quarantine po ngayon. How nice. Sana po
Ino-monitor po namin ng updates
namin.
and ipagdasal natin na mananalo po siya.
Yes. Opo. Thank you very much po for your time, Conjen. I know you're a very busy man and yet pinaunlakan nyo kami. Maraming salamat po, Conjen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, that was First Secretary and Consul General Michael Lyndon B. Garcia from the Philippine Embassy in Thailand, and we'll be right back.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba. Sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. May lalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa new era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
Indonesian President Joko Widodo takes on his custom motorbike to test the new Mandalika International Circuit in Lombok Island. Here's Indonesian President Joko Widodo. Let's take a look.
Dukung penyelenggaraan event-event kelas dunia di kawasan Mandalika ini seperti yang sebentar lagi akan diselenggarakan, yaitu World Superbike 2021 dan dilanjutkan nantinya di bulan Maret 2022 dengan MotoGP.
Sirkuit Mandalika ini sirkuit baru, dan tadi kan juga baru saja hujan, jadi saya nggak berani ngebut. Meskipun nggak ngebut, tapi saya kira yang lain-lain jauh jauh tertinggal. Banyak tikungan yang tajam-tajam sekali. Di sini kan ada 17 titik tikungan yang saya kira semuanya sulit lah untuk saya. Kalau untuk pembalap mungkin nggak ada masalah, untuk saya sangat sulit. Ya kita harapkan muncul titik pertumbuhan ekonomi baru di NTB. Saya kira ini sebuah perhelatan besar yang setiap tahun terus akan diadakan di sirkuit Mandalika dan itu dipastikan akan memberikan dampak pertumbuhan ekonomi di provinsi NTB.
The street circuit will host World Superbike and Asia Talent Cup races this month and is scheduled to host MotoGP in March next year. Widodo was riding his customized Kawasaki W175 retro motorcycle along with some of his ministers and other officials. The 4.3 kilometers long circuit will be MotoGP's first street circuit. Indonesia has been absent in MotoGP calendar for more than 20 years after the race in Sentul International Circuit in West Java in 1997.
Thank you very much, Eliana, for keeping me company today, as always. Have a great weekend. Safe and great weekend.
Thank you, Alma. Have a nice weekend too. And that is the latest news in the ASEAN region. Once again, I'm Eliana Faith Sebastian from ABC Vietnam Bureau, and we live in interesting times.
And we'll see you back next week. Same time, same place here on ASEAN in Focus. I'm Alma Angeles. We live in interesting times.